For many years I have the habit of keeping a copy of all my work, and the reason I do is because this is a long tradition amongst silhouettists of the past. So whenever I cut a silhouette, there are always two copies. There's a white one and a black one. So I've been keeping this archive now ever since I went as a full-time silhouettist in the 1990s. So this is volume 69, and each volume holds around about 3,000 silhouettes. So it's easy to see that I've done many hundreds of thousands of silhouettes during the time I've been working. A lot of things happened in my life. My son was diagnosed with autism when he was in primary school. So he had a lot of difficulties in school. And the thing I noticed about that straight away was that the problems he was having at school was very similar to the kind of problems that I had at school. And because of that, I had a very hard time at first accepting the diagnosis of autism, and it caused a big kind of tension in our relationship. That Kazumi was very intent on trying to get Nicholas the help he needed, trying to give him the support at school. And meanwhile, I was thinking, well, I never got any of that. And, and it was, and I kind of grew up all right. But then I was thinking at the same time, did I grow up all right? My teenage years were very difficult. I came away from school feeling very depressed, very insecure, very unsure of myself. I felt entirely unable to seek employment or to get a job, so I essentially ruled that out of my life. And when I thought about that, I thought that was quite a big step for someone, just leaving college to take. So I began to think maybe there was more to that than just my quirky sort of individualism. So in my early 40s, I went to see a doctor, and she referred me to a specialist in autism. And then about a few months after Nicholas was diagnosed, I was also diagnosed with autism. To me, that was really a turning point in my life, because it sort of made sense of all the sort of social and difficulties that I'd had as a young man. And it also made more sense of my quite obsessive nature. I have this kind of laser-like obsession about art and about drawing, and then later about silhouettes. The way I look at it now is that autism was a kind of secret weapon, that it was something that enabled me to really focus deeply on this really niche, tiny art. Looking back, I'd say that the one good thing that happened to me at school was my art teacher. So I was very fortunate to make a connection with my art teacher, a man called John Bunting, who was a sculptor who was supporting himself by teaching art at the school I was at. And his thing was to train people to draw from life. And I think that's really where I got my passion for drawing from. And looking back, the reason that I wanted to go to art college when I left school was because of the connection I'd made with him, and my love of art came from those days. When I left art college, I didn't want to go backwards. I felt that going into some kind of world where I had an employer and people telling me what to do would be difficult for me. I didn't think that I could cope with it emotionally. And so the way I described it at the time was to call myself one of nature's natural self-employed. I sort of felt I had to work for myself in order to preserve the new kind of personal freedom that I'd found during art college. And my solution to that was to become a street artist. So for about 12 years, I worked in Covent Garden in London, drawing portraits of tourists and people like that. And to this day, I always keep in my studio this thing, which I'll get and show you, which is my old signboard from my Covent Garden days. You have to imagine this was in an A-frame thing. This is very old and battered. I kept rubbing out the price and repainting it. It's all about I just like to have it in the studio because it reminds me where I came from. It was not a stable income, you know, it had good days and bad days, but on average it was good enough to, you know, kind of support a family. So I married a girl called Kazumi, she's from Japan, and we have 2 children, Natasha and Nicholas. We've been married a very long time. And then one summer a Spanish artist came to Covent Garden and he was cutting these little black portraits of people, and which I knew what they were because I'd seen them, but I knew nothing about them. He was a nice guy. I'm still in touch with him. He's working now as a silhouette artist in the Canary Islands, and he was, and he always used to see, Charles, this isn't working. No one's buying my silhouettes. Let's go and have a drink. And he'd buy a bottle of wine, and I'd have 1 glass, and he'd drink the rest of the bottle. And so, and so he. But when he left, I bought a pair of scissors and I went home and I did a silhouette of my wife, and it looked really like her, and I still have that. And it's bigger than I would cut today, and it's quite rough and choppy, but the likeness is there, and I knew straight away it was something I could do. But while I was there, an entertainment agent came by and saw my work. And he asked me, he took a card, and then he called me a couple of weeks later and he said, Charles, I've got a job for you. He said, how did you feel about going to Dubai? And I said, okay, yeah, well, why not? Why not? That sounds fine. Tell me more about it. And it was a New Year's Eve party at a hotel in Dubai, and he told me, and this was sort of like in the middle of the 1990s, so it was a long time ago. He said they'll pay you a £500 fee and they'll pay your flights and all expenses. And I think, great, I'm in. And I had probably cut maybe 100 silhouettes in the year up until that point. Mostly I was still drawing portraits, but in that night I cut 120 more, and my work completely changed. I sort of figured out how to do them, and so I came away from that job much more confident about the silhouettes than I was when I went into it. I used to be quite hard on myself. You know, I used to ask myself, why is it that I have to kind of rehearse every conversation? Why is it that I always have to think so deeply about other things that other people just seem to be able to do things naturally, and yet I always have to kind of plan everything in advance. I need to have a script. If I can't have a script, I've literally got nothing to say. You know, if people are talking around me, I just become quiet. I can't cope. And I realized that the coping mechanisms were not just me being inadequate. It was me trying to find a way to deal with something that was deep inside me. But what I came to understand is that working at an event is entirely different to being a guest at an event. And that as long as I've got a pair of scissors in my hand and a piece of paper in my pocket, I am really confident. And I can exude a kind of confidence which comes out of rehearsing, you know, comes out of being in a situation I'm really familiar with, which is quite different from being a guest in an unknown event where I don't really know what's going on, because I can make the event my own. You know, when I'm working, I have a long sort of Regency length burgundy coloured coat, and it has you've seen it in my TED talk, yes, and it has in it these hanging pockets, which I put inside, and these pockets have got cards for putting silhouettes. They've got a pair of scissors in. They've got bits of paper in the top, and so the coat becomes my studio. So I'm able to say, you know, wherever I'm working, that's my studio. My approach to the TED Talk was to be word perfect. So I spent months, I mean, it was literally months. I wrote the script, and then I read it out loud, and I listened to it. Once I got to a final script, I kept rehearsing it, and I was literally speaking it in the shower. I was speaking it as I walked down the road, all the time. All the time I was speaking it over and over again, so that I could walk on stage in front of 1,500 people and just deliver it without having to take a breath. When people ask me how I discovered I can cut silhouettes, I've got maybe 5 or 6 answers I can just pull out of a hat. But I never just speak them. It's always like, oh, let me think. I know. You know, because it needs to feel to the person like Sorry, this is really detailed, but this is how my mind thinks. I'm always thinking, how can I look natural, even if I'm not?
I think we all do that.
Yeah. By being a silhouettist, I've learned about history because I've started collecting antique silhouettes and really out of a kind of obsessive interest to learn more about them, because there's very little written about silhouettes. So there's not much history and study being done. So I started looking into that, and I wrote a book about silhouettes called Mastering Silhouettes, which happened because I was approached by a publisher. She was looking oddly for someone to write a book about the art of silhouettes, and she'd asked both the National Portrait Gallery and the Royal Academy of Arts if they knew anyone, and they both recommended me, and I was really amazed. I was like, how did that happen? And I can only assume it's because I'd done events at both those institutions. So that led to the book, and then a friend of mine who is an independent film director, when he saw the book, he said, "Charles, we must make this into a film." And at the time I thought he was mad, but at the same time the idea lingered, and so we made a film called Silhouette Secrets, which came out a few years ago, which did very well in the we did a lot of film festivals. We won a couple of best awards for best documentary awards, those kind of things. Also in the last few years I've sort of come back to my own, what I call my fine art work, and I think what I came back to it was with the realization that silhouettes are at the center of what I do, and so I started exploring how to use silhouettes in the world of fine art, exploring how to put images inside silhouettes and painting landscapes around silhouettes. And then more recently I've been working on a series of paper cuttings which I've made by taking a drawing which I've done in a sketchbook and then cutting it out in a very literal way. I was in Japan earlier this year, and I did a series of drawings of something called rakugo, which is like Japanese storytelling. And then I took those images and cut them out, and people are very surprised that I cut them with scissors. They always assume that I work with a knife. But for me, scissors are such a natural medium that when I'm holding a pair of scissors, they seem like part of my hands. Is just to explore, and my study of the history of silhouettes and the way different silhouette artists have made silhouettes over the years. It brings it back, and I kind of want to try out all their techniques. So if I cut a silhouette of someone and hold it up and everyone goes, "Wow, that's amazing, you've got him, he looks just like him," then I know I've done my job. I know I've earned my fee, that I'm, as an entertainment, it's working. But there are occasions when I hold up a silhouette and people don't laugh. It's almost like they go white, it's almost like they've seen a ghost. And what's actually happening is that they've seen their own shadow, if that makes sense. They recognize themselves, or maybe they recognize their mother or someone like that in the silhouette. And it connects to them on quite a personal level. And then afterwards they're just completely amazed, and they keep wanting to thank me and hug me, and it's like I've given them the most amazing gift. And to me, those moments, which don't really happen often enough, but when they happen, I feel I've gone beyond what's expected of me, and the craft, the old English craft of cutting a silhouette has somehow become an art, and it's those kind of moments are very precious to me, and that's what keeps me coming back and wanting to cut more silhouettes.